The sun was high in the sky, casting a golden glow over the quiet streets of Los Angeles. The afternoon was peaceful, with people strolling along the sidewalks, sipping coffee, and chatting with friends. Birds chirped from the trees, and a cool breeze carried the scent of fresh pastries from a nearby cafe. It was one of those perfect days where everything seemed calm and in place. Then came the sound of a roaring engine. A biker sped down the road, his loud motorcycle breaking the peaceful silence. He wasn't in a hurry, he just liked the attention. The people on the sidewalk turned to look, some shaking their heads in disapproval. But he didn't care. He enjoyed making his presence known. The biker, Travis, had always been the kind of man who believed he could do whatever he wanted. Rules didn't mean much to him, and neither did respect for others. As he pulled into a parking spot near a small cafe, he took off his helmet, revealing a smirk on his face. He loved the way people looked at him, the mix of curiosity and annoyance. It made him feel powerful. He swung his leg over the bike and stretched his arms, enjoying the feeling of being the center of attention. Just then, a soft barking sound caught his ears. He turned his head and saw two dogs playing near the entrance of the cafe. One was a sleek, muscular dog with a shiny coat, and the other was slightly smaller but just as energetic. Their tails wagged as they ran in circles, enjoying their little game. A few people around the cafe smiled, watching the happy dogs. Travis, however, didn't smile. Instead, he rolled his eyes. He had never been fond of dogs. To him, they were just noisy animals that got in his way. As he walked past them, one of the dogs playfully ran close to his boots. The biker paused, looking down at the innocent creature. Without thinking twice, he lifted his leg and gave the dog a rough nudge with his boot, just enough to send it stumbling back. The dog let out a startled yelp and quickly moved away, its ears dropping. The other dog immediately stopped playing and stood protectively by its friend, its eyes watching Travis carefully. A few cafe customers gasped in surprise, their conversations suddenly stopping. A couple sitting near the door exchanged concerned glances. Travis, however, only chuckled. He enjoyed the little display of power. It wasn't that he hated dogs. He just liked feeling in control. To him, it was nothing more than a small joke, something to amuse himself with. He had no idea that his actions had been noticed by someone sitting inside the cafe. From behind a large window, a man in a dark hoodie had been watching the whole thing. He had seen the way Travis moved, the way he kicked the dog, and the way he laughed afterward. But unlike the others, he didn't gasp or exchange worried looks. Instead, he remained completely calm. His fingers lightly tapped the side of his coffee cup as his sharp eyes stayed locked onto the biker. Travis, unaware of the piercing gaze on him, stretched his arms and yawned. He had no idea that the man inside the cafe was not just another bystander. He didn't know that he had just messed with the wrong person. And most importantly, he didn't know that the dogs he had carelessly kicked belonged to Jason Statham. Inside the cozy cafe, the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. The soft chatter of customers created a peaceful atmosphere, and the clinking of cups and spoons added a gentle rhythm to the afternoon. People sat at their tables, some working on laptops, others enjoying their drinks, unaware that something interesting was about to unfold. Near the window, a man sat alone, wearing a dark hoodie. His hands rested calmly on the table, one of them holding a cup of coffee. He hadn't touched his drink in a while. His focus was elsewhere. His sharp eyes had been watching everything that had happened outside: the biker, the dogs, and the unnecessary kick. He didn't react like the others. He didn't gasp or shake his head. Instead, he remained completely still, his expression unreadable. Jason Statham was not the kind of man who liked trouble, but he also wasn't the kind to ignore it. He had seen many things in his life, both on screen and off, but there were a few things he never tolerated. One of them was cruelty toward those who couldn't defend themselves. His dogs weren't just pets to him. They were family, loyal, loving, and always by his side. Seeing one of them get hurt, even in a small way, was enough to make his blood run cold. Outside, the biker stretched his arms, looking around as if he owned the place. He had no idea that someone was still watching him. He had no idea that he had made a mistake, a big one. Jason placed his coffee cup down gently. He wasn't in a hurry. He had learned long ago that patience was a powerful thing. He observed the biker for a moment longer, studying the way he moved, the way he carried himself. He had met people like this before, people who thought they were stronger than everyone else, people who used their size or their attitude to make others feel small. Jason had dealt with men like him on movie sets, in training, and in real life. And every time, the result had been the same. Slowly, Jason stood up. His movements were calm, controlled. He adjusted his hoodie and took one last sip of his coffee before stepping toward the door. A few customers noticed him as he moved. Some recognized his face immediately, their eyes widening in surprise. They didn't say anything, but they exchanged glances. Jason Statham, the action star, was right there in their cafe. And from the way he was walking, something interesting was about to happen. As Jason stepped outside, the warm sunlight touched his face. His dogs saw him and wagged their tails, happy to see their owner. Jason gave them a small nod before shifting his gaze to the biker. The man was still standing near his motorcycle, checking his phone, completely unaware of what was coming. Jason walked up slowly, his footsteps steady and deliberate. The biker finally noticed him and looked up, his expression turning from relaxed to slightly confused. Jason didn't say anything at first. He simply stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets, his eyes locked onto the man in front of him. For the first time that day, the biker felt something unusual, a small sense of discomfort. He wasn't sure why, but there was something about the way this stranger was looking at him. It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration. It was something much colder. A look that told him that this wasn't just another ordinary guy. Jason tilted his head slightly, his voice calm but firm. "That's my dog you just kicked," he said. The biker blinked, surprised by the sudden confrontation. He let out a small chuckle, trying to act unfazed. "Yeah, so what?" he replied, his tone full of arrogance. Jason didn't answer right away. He simply looked at him, letting the silence stretch for a moment. The biker shifted his weight uncomfortably, suddenly feeling like he had misjudged the situation. "You've got 5 seconds, Jason said, his voice quiet but full of meaning. "Apologize." The biker laughed again, but this time it wasn't as confident. He had no idea that his life was about to take a very unexpected turn. The biker stared at Jason for a moment, trying to figure him out. He wasn't sure if this was some kind of joke. The way Jason spoke, calm, serious, and without hesitation, made him feel uneasy. But Travis, being who he was, didn't like backing down. He crossed his arms, letting out another short laugh. "Apologize? To a dog?" he said, shaking his head. "You've got to be kidding me." Jason didn't move. He didn't blink. His eyes remained locked on Travis, steady as ever. 5 seconds, Jason repeated, his voice even quieter this time, but somehow heavier. Travis scoffed, rolling his shoulders like he was getting ready for a fight. He had been in plenty of arguments before, plenty of little scuffles here and there. He was bigger than most guys, stronger too, and he had always relied on that to intimidate people. But something about this man in front of him felt different. "Look, man, I don't know who you think you are," Travis said, stepping forward slightly, trying to make himself look taller. "But I don't take orders from anybody." Jason sighed, glancing at his watch. Then, as if he had already lost interest, he turned slightly to the side. 5 seconds are up," he said, almost to himself. And then, in the blink of an eye, he moved. Before Travis could react, Jason took a small step forward and grabbed his wrist with precision. It wasn't a rough grab. It was controlled, firm, and placed perfectly. Before Travis could even think about pulling away, Jason twisted just enough to make him lose his balance. His fingers opened instinctively, and his helmet, which he had been loosely holding, slipped from his hand and fell to the ground with a dull thud. The biker's expression changed instantly. His smirk was gone. His body tensed as he tried to pull away. But Jason's grip was like steel. Then, with a simple yet expertly timed motion, Jason shifted his weight and pressed down on Travis's arm just enough to make him stumble. His knee buckled, and he let out a surprised gasp as his body dropped slightly. It all happened so fast that Travis didn't even have time to understand what was going on. His heart pounded as he tried to regain control, but Jason had already stepped back, letting him go. Travis stumbled but quickly straightened himself, face red with both frustration and embarrassment. He clenched his fists, taking a deep breath. "You got lucky," he muttered, trying to sound tough. Jason didn't respond. He simply stood there, his hands back in his pockets, his expression completely calm. The silence around them was heavy. The people sitting at the cafe had stopped talking. Some had even pulled out their phones, sensing that something unusual was happening. Travis, still trying to save face, took a step closer. "I don't know who you think you are, but you just made a big mistake," he growled. Jason finally tilted his head slightly, his expression almost amused. "Do you really not know?" he asked. Travis blinked. For the first time, he looked closely at the man in front of him. There was something familiar about him, his face, his stance, the way he moved. Then, like a puzzle coming together, realization started creeping into his mind. His eyes widened slightly. Jason noticed the change in his expression and gave a small, knowing nod. "Yeah," he said. "That's what I thought." Travis took a small step back, suddenly unsure. His mind raced. He had seen this man before. Not in real life, but on screens, in movies. Jason Statham. The name hit him like a hammer. The action star. The guy known for his tough roles, his insane fight scenes, and his no-nonsense attitude. And now, here he was, standing in front of him, looking at him like he was nothing more than an inconvenience. Travis swallowed hard. His confidence, which had been so strong just moments ago, suddenly felt a lot weaker. Jason took a slow step forward, closing the small distance between them. His voice was calm, steady. "I gave you a chance," he said. "Now I'm going to teach you something about respect." The biker didn't know what was coming next, but for the first time in a long time, he felt something he wasn't used to feeling. A heavy silence hung in the air. The biker, Travis, stood frozen, his mind racing. Just seconds ago, he had felt powerful, untouchable, but now, everything had changed. He had seen this man before, on the big screen, in action movies where he fought off bad guys with skill and confidence. But this wasn't a movie. This was real life. And Jason Statham was standing right in front of him. Jason's expression remained calm, unreadable. He wasn't angry. He wasn't shouting. That's what made it worse. The way he carried himself, the way he stood without a hint of fear, it was enough to make anyone think twice before challenging him. Travis forced himself to act like it didn't matter. He rolled his shoulders, shaking off the moment of hesitation. "All right, so you're some movie star," he muttered. "Big deal." Jason took another slow step forward, his eyes never leaving Travis. His voice was quiet but firm. "It's not about who I am," he said. "It's about what you did." Travis let out a nervous chuckle, trying to act tough. "Look, man, I didn't know the dog was yours. It was just a little push. No harm done." Jason didn't blink. "No harm," he repeated. He glanced at his dog, who was still standing nearby, its tail down, ears slightly lowered. "That's not how I see it." Travis took a step back, suddenly realizing how many people were watching. The cafe customers had stopped talking. Some had their phones out, recording the scene. His face burned with embarrassment. He didn't want to look weak in front of all these people. Trying to regain control, he straightened up and forced a smirk. "Look, old man, I don't have time for this," he said. "I've got places to be." Jason sighed. "You still don't get it, do you?" Before Travis could react, Jason moved. It wasn't a big move, just a small, precise step forward. But it was fast, too fast. In the blink of an eye, Jason reached out and tapped the side of Travis's knee. Not a kick, not a strike, just a light touch in exactly the right spot. Travis's leg gave out instantly. His body wobbled, and before he knew it, he was on one knee, struggling to keep his balance. A shocked gasp spread through the crowd. Jason didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. He simply looked down at Travis, his hands still in his pockets. "That was your first warning," he said. Travis's face turned red with frustration. He pushed himself back up, clenching his fists. "You think you're tough," he spat. "You think you can just—" Jason took another small step forward, cutting him off. "I'm giving you one last chance," he said. "Apologize. Now." Travis looked around, feeling trapped. The people watching. The phones recording. The weight of Jason's presence pressing down on him. His pride screamed at him to fight back, to swing, to do something. But deep inside, he knew the truth. He had already lost. Jason Statham wasn't just some actor. He was trained, experienced, and completely in control. Travis had never fought someone like this before. He had never stood in front of someone who didn't need to prove anything, because they already knew they could win. Travis swallowed hard. His hands, which had been curled into fists, slowly relaxed. His heart pounded as he realized he only had two choices: walk away with what little dignity he had left, or make the biggest mistake of his life. Travis stood there, his heart pounding. His body tensed, but his mind was in complete chaos. He had never been in a situation like this before. All his life, he had relied on his size, his loud voice, and his rough attitude to get what he wanted. People usually backed down. They walked away. But Jason Statham wasn't like them. Jason stood calmly, his hands still in his pockets, his eyes locked onto Travis like a hunter watching its prey. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even breathing hard. He had barely moved, yet somehow he had complete control over the situation. The crowd around them watched in silence, waiting to see what would happen next. Some had their phones up, recording everything. Travis could feel the pressure. If he backed down now, it would be embarrassing. But if he made the wrong move, his pride told him to fight back, to do something, anything. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't end well. Jason took a small step closer, his voice quiet but firm. "I ask you to apologize," he said. "This is the last time I'll ask." Travis clenched his jaw. He hated this feeling, this helplessness, this moment where he had no control. He looked around, hoping for support, but no one spoke up for him. The cafe customers, the people passing by, they all seemed to be on Jason's side. Even the ones who didn't know who he was could tell what was happening. Taking a deep breath, Travis forced himself to calm down. His hands, which had been curled into fists, slowly loosened. He glanced at the dog he had kicked earlier. It was still watching him, its big brown eyes full of confusion. It wasn't scared of him. It wasn't angry. It just didn't understand why he had hurt it. For some reason, that look hit Travis harder than anything else. With his face burning from humiliation, he swallowed his pride. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "I'm sorry." Jason didn't react at first. He simply studied Travis, as if deciding whether or not to believe him. "Look at them when you say it," Jason said, tilting his head toward the dog. Travis felt a lump in his throat. His whole body resisted, but he knew he had no other choice. Slowly, he turned toward the dog and forced the words out. "I'm sorry," he repeated, this time a little louder. The crowd murmured. Some nodded in approval. Others chuckled, amused by how the once proud biker had been humbled in front of everyone. Jason gave a small nod, as if he was finally satisfied. He took one step back, giving Travis space. "Good," he said simply. "Now leave." Travis hesitated. His pride still burned, but he knew better than to argue. Without another word, he grabbed his helmet from the ground, threw one last glance at Jason, then turned toward his motorcycle. His hands trembled slightly as he started the engine. He wanted to say something, to get the last word in, but nothing came to mind. He had lost, and everyone knew it. As his bike roared to life, he sped away, disappearing down the street. The moment he was gone, the cafe erupted in quiet murmurs. Some people clapped softly. Others laughed. A few walked up to Jason, smiling. "That was amazing," one person said. "You handled that perfectly." Jason simply shrugged. "People need to learn respect," he said. His dogs, sensing that everything was fine now, wagged their tails and moved closer to him. Jason knelt down, scratching them behind the ears. "You guys okay?" he murmured. They licked his hand in response. Jason smiled, then stood up and turned toward the cafe. "All right," he said to no one in particular. "Now, can I finish my coffee?" The crowd chuckled, and just like that, the moment was over. Life moved on, but no one who had witnessed it would forget what they had seen that day. Travis rode his motorcycle through the streets, gripping the handles tightly. His mind was a storm of emotions. Anger, shame, and confusion all mixed together. He had never felt this humiliated before. He had been embarrassed in front of a crowd, in front of strangers who had watched him apologize like a child. And worst of all, it had been caught on camera. He could already imagine the videos spreading online. People laughing at him, calling him weak. His biker friends would see it too. What would they think? Would they still respect him? Travis clenched his jaw and twisted the throttle, speeding up. But no matter how fast he rode, he couldn't escape the feeling inside him. The image of Jason Statham standing in front of him wouldn't leave his mind. The way he had moved, the way he had spoken, it was different from anything Travis had ever seen. He had met tough guys before, had gotten into plenty of fights. But this was something else. Jason had been completely in control, without even needing to raise his voice. And then there was the dog. Travis had always thought of dogs as just animals. Nothing special. But when he looked into that dog's eyes earlier, he had felt something strange. It hadn't been scared. It hadn't been angry. It had just looked, confused, like it didn't understand why he had heard it. The thought made his chest feel heavy. After riding for a while, he finally stopped in an empty parking lot. He turned off his engine and just sat there, staring at the ground. His hands were still shaking, but not from fear. It was something else, something deeper. For the first time, in a long time, he started thinking about himself. Why had he done it? Why had he kicked that dog? He hadn't been angry at it. It hadn't done anything to him. It was just there, and he had heard it for no reason. Was this the kind of person he had become? He closed his eyes and sighed. Memories from his past came rushing back. When he was a kid, he had loved animals. He had even wanted a dog once. But life had been tough. Growing up, he had learned that being strong was the only way to survive. He had gotten into fights, made friends with the wrong people, and before he knew it, he had become someone who didn't care about others. Now, for the first time, he was seeing himself from the outside, and he didn't like what he saw. After a long moment, he pulled out his phone. He didn't check social media. He didn't want to see if the video had gone viral yet. Instead, he searched for something else. A dog shelter. He stared at the screen for a few seconds before finally making a decision. He started his bike again and rode off, this time with a new purpose. A few miles away, Jason Statham sat back in his chair at the cafe, sipping his coffee. His dog rested at his feet, relaxed now that the trouble had passed. A man sitting nearby leaned over and smiled. "You really handled that well," he said. Jason glanced at him and shrugged. "Some people just need a wake-up call," he replied. The man chuckled. You think he'll change? Jason looked out at the street, watching as the sun began to set. That's up to him, he said. But sometimes, a lesson learned the hard way is the one that stays with you forever. And with that, he took another sip of his coffee, enjoying the quiet moment. Meanwhile, across town, Travis parked his bike outside a small dog shelter. He took a deep breath, then stepped inside. He didn't know what he was looking for, but something inside him told him that this was where he needed to be. Travis stood at the entrance of the small dog shelter, feeling strangely nervous. The place was quiet except for the occasional barking from inside. He had no idea why he was here. He had never been to a dog shelter before, but something in his heart told him he needed to be here. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. The shelter smelled of fresh hay and cleaning supplies. Rows of cages lined the walls, each one holding a different dog. Some were big, some small. Some wagged their tails excitedly at the sight of him, while others stayed curled up in the corner. A woman wearing a volunteer shirt approached him with a warm smile. "Can I help you?" she asked. Travis hesitated. He had never been good at explaining his feelings. I just wanted to look around," he said awkwardly. The woman nodded. "Of course. Take your time." As he walked past the cages, he found himself staring at the dogs. He saw a small brown puppy with bright eyes, a large black dog that looked strong but gentle, and an old golden retriever that wagged its tail slowly. Then he stopped in front of a cage in the corner. Inside, there was a dog with a thin frame and sad eyes. Its fur was short and patchy in some places, as if it had been through a rough time. Unlike the other dogs, it didn't jump up or wag its tail. It just looked at him with quiet curiosity. Travis knelt down. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. The dog tilted its head slightly, but didn't move closer. The woman noticed him watching the dog. "That one came in a few weeks ago," she explained. "Someone found him abandoned on the street. He's still learning to trust people again." Travis's chest tightened. He looked at the dog and saw something familiar, something he had felt in himself. Loneliness. Hesitation. A need for a second chance. Slowly, he reached a hand through the bars, but he didn't try to touch the dog. He just held it there, giving the dog the choice to come closer. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, little by little, the dog leaned forward and gently sniffed his hand. Travis felt something stir inside him. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was regret. Maybe it was something he had buried a long time ago. Whatever it was, it made him say something he had never thought he would say. "Can I adopt him?" The woman looked surprised but pleased. "Really?" Travis nodded. "Yeah, I think we both need a fresh start." The woman smiled warmly. "That's wonderful. Let's fill out some paperwork, and you can take him home." As she walked away to get the forms, Travis turned back to the dog. "Looks like it's you and me now, buddy," he murmured. For the first time, the dog's tail gave a tiny, hesitant wag. Travis felt a lump in his throat. He wasn't sure what had led him here today, but deep down, he knew this was the right thing to do. A second chance. For both of them. Meanwhile, across town, Jason Statham finished his coffee and stood up, ready to leave. He didn't know what had happened to Travis after their encounter, and he didn't really expect to see him again. But something told him that maybe, just maybe, the lesson had made a difference. And sometimes, that was enough. Travis walked out of the shelter with the dog by his side. The little creature still seemed unsure, its steps slow and careful, but there was something different in its eyes now. A small spark of trust. He had named him Buddy. The shelter worker had handed him a leash and some food, giving him a few instructions on how to care for his new friend. It was all new to him. He had never taken care of an animal before, but he was willing to learn. As they reached his motorcycle, he hesitated. Riding a bike with a dog wasn't exactly easy. Buddy wasn't big, but he wasn't small enough to hold while riding either. Travis sighed. Guess I need to make some changes, he muttered to himself. Instead of forcing the situation, he pulled out his phone and booked a cab. It was the first time in years that he willingly left his bike behind. But somehow, it didn't bother him. During the ride home, Buddy sat beside him, still a little nervous. He didn't wag his tail, but he wasn't scared either. That was good enough for now. When they reached Travis' apartment, he led Buddy inside carefully. His home wasn't fancy, just a small space with a couch, a bed, and a few old posters on the wall. It wasn't exactly what you'd call dog-friendly, but that would change soon. Buddy sniffed around, taking in the new surroundings. Travis watched him closely. He still couldn't believe he had done this. Just yesterday, he was a different person, someone who didn't care about others, someone who never thought twice about his actions. But something about Buddy made him want to do better. That night, as he sat on the couch, Buddy curled up on the floor nearby. Travis reached down slowly, giving the dog a chance to pull away if he wanted. But Buddy didn't move. Instead, he let Travis gently rest a hand on his back. A small, quiet moment. And for the first time, in a long time, Travis felt peaceful. The next morning, he woke up earlier than usual. He had always been the type to sleep late, but today felt different. Today, he had something to do. He took Buddy for a walk around the block. It was strange, being out this early and not rushing anywhere. He noticed things he hadn't paid attention to before. The soft morning breeze, the sound of birds, the way Buddy's ears perked up at every little noise. They stopped near a cafe, and Travis hesitated. It was the cafe, the same one where everything had happened. He saw a familiar figure sitting outside, sipping coffee. Jason Statham. Travis took a deep breath. He could have walked away. He could have avoided this moment. But instead, he tightened Buddy's leash and walked forward. Jason noticed him right away. His sharp eyes glanced at Travis, then at Buddy. He didn't look surprised, just curious. Travis stopped near Jason's table, clearing his throat. "Hey," he said. Jason raised an eyebrow. "Hey." There was a pause. Then Travis gestured at Buddy. "I adopted him." Jason nodded slowly, studying the dog. Then he smirked. "Looks like you're learning something." Travis rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, I guess I am." Jason took another sip of his coffee, then gave a small nod of approval. "Good." That was all he said. He didn't lecture, didn't give a speech. But somehow that simple word meant more than anything else. Travis felt something in his chest loosen. Maybe he had messed up in the past. Maybe he had been the kind of person no one liked. But that didn't mean he had to stay that way. People could change. And this was his first step. As he walked away with Buddy, a small smile formed on his face. For the first time in years, he felt like he was heading in the right direction.